Over the years, SEGA has attempted multiple different games to try and cross over their franchises. The JP exclusive SEGA Gaga, SEGA Superstars, that silly iToy game, Project X Zone, where they also crossed over with Bandai Namco and Capcom, and then there's also SEGA Heroes. Actually, let's just ignore SEGA Heroes existing. We're not going to be talking about those games, however. The games I want to highlight are what I believe to be some of the best celebrations of all of SEGA's IPs together. SEGA Superstars Tennis, Sonic and SEGA All Stars Racing, and Sonic and All Stars Racing Transformed. I've talked about these games before, but I've only talked about how Jet Set Radio was represented in those games, and not the actual games themselves. So, are these games actually really good? Are these games good representations of SEGA's IPs? Well, I'm gonna give you the good, the bad, and the questionable choices of the SEGA All Stars games. SEGA Superstars Tennis is the first game here on our list where we have the SEGA crew come together to play a rousing game of tennis, but with a twist. Now, if you played Mario Power Tennis, then this is pretty much the same idea, but with a SEGA roster. I played this game a lot as a kid and have a lot of fond memories of playing this game with my cousins, but it wasn't because of the actual tennis, which is where I think the game kind of fumbles. Before we actually get into the gameplay, I actually want to talk about the roster. We got characters from each era of SEGA consoles, and I'd say the overall picks for this game are pretty solid. Sonic, being the head honcho, obviously gets the most characters. Himself, Tails, Amy, Dr. Eggman, and Shadow. No Knuckles is a weird choice though. Representing Monkey Ball is Ai and Mimi. Representing Nice is Nice and Riala. Representing Jet Set Radio is Beat and Gum. Ooh La La and Pudding are representing Space Channel 5. Then for the single reps we have Gilius Thunderhead from Golden Axe. Makes sense. Golden Axe was one of the big Sega Genesis games. Migo. Then to top out the roster, we got the mascot of the Master System, Alex Kidd. It's funny looking at this roster even in the context of when this game was released, because back in 2007, so many series were dead, Sonic was going through his worst year critically at that point, and others had recent titles that had mediocre receptions. Despite it though, I still think it's a solid roster. What I'm not a fan of though is how everyone looks in this game, because ew. Everyone is so stiff and lifeless. They stay with the same two expressions every time and can barely emote properly. Even when they do their victory animations, they just immediately snap back to their default poses like robots. It's uncanny. Doesn't help either that a lot of characters' voice lines are ripped from previous games they've been in. All the Sonic characters have their lines from Sonic 06, Ooh La La and Pudding have their lines from Space Channel Part 1 and 2. The only characters to really get new lines were Beat, Gum, and Alex Kidd. They were definitely on a budget for this game.
15 love. I've got it! Yes. B.
Alright. Yeah, I'm so great!
Okay, so the actual tennis part. I mentioned this was where the game fumbled in its gameplay, and it has to do with the feel of the game. Its counterpart, Mario Power Tennis, is one of the most fluid tennis games I've played. Once I hit the button to swing, it responds instantly and I'm able to do various different shots, and I'm able to control the ball. The power-up system is implemented pretty well in this game too. There are some obvious supers that are better than others, but I think there is an overall decent balance due to the nature of how offense and defensive power shots are. Meanwhile, with SEGA Superstars Tennis, there is no weight to hitting the ball. It feels like with every hit, the ball just moves like it's in slow motion. It doesn't matter if you try to go for a lob shot or a low shot, it still feels like the ball doesn't really go anywhere. It also doesn't help that there is a noticeable delay on characters hitting the ball. Since I've only played the Wii version of this game, I also had to deal with the unresponsive motion controls sometimes. You can choose to play the game sideways with the Wii remote, but moving with the D-pad in this game feels so awkward and the delay to hit still exists. The big gimmick of SEGA Superstars Tennis is the All-Star moves. This is similar to the power shots of Mario Power Tennis, but instead of one single shot, characters enter a super-powered state. Once they activate it, their special moves unlock to mess up the opponent. Now, on paper, this is a fun idea. However, in execution, here's where it fumbles. This is even more unbalanced than the power shot. Some characters just have straight up awful ones. Supersonic on paper should be good because every time he hits it, it goes in a zigzag. But the speed of the ball and the arc is very predictable. Meanwhile, Eggman gets spike balls that bounce on the ground at angles that cover every corner of the court with a lot of hits done. Once you get hit by this, you practically lose. Another example of the balance is Ai and Mimi. Ai just drops banana peels that don't really affect you much and the ball speed is still slow. Meanwhile, Mimi hits you with the craziest mix while the whole family jumps at you. Like, how did they design some of these moves? You can also rack up your All-Stars pretty easily by getting a huge boost in the gauge every time you score. You can also decide to not spend it earlier on, and when you do decide to spend it, once it's over, the amount of meter you built when you didn't use it carries over, so you can get it back pretty quickly. The All-Star mechanic is actually pretty interesting, but I am not a fan of how it was implemented in this game. So I'm not a fan of actually playing tennis in this game. Then if the tennis in this game isn't good in the tennis game, what does this game have to offer? Let me introduce you to the mini games. The mini games, I'd say, are the real highlights of this game. There are specific courts that come with their very own special mini games. For Sonic, you have to collect rings while avoiding the Sonic 06 robos shooting spike balls at you. For the Monkey Ball stage, you have to hit balls into the goal. In House of the Dead, you have to hit the zombies with the ball, and you can also get some power-ups and extra lives by saving civilians like in the actual game. Jet Set Radio, you collect spray cans and tag up the court while avoiding Rokaku police. You can even play Puyo Puyo and Choo Choo Rocket in this format, which is actually really fascinating. Every time I played this game, it was always just for the mini games. They're kind of a band-aid for the mediocre tennis, but at least the games here are actually really fun. One thing I gotta compliment is how much I like the courts in this game. I think the locations are pretty well thought out and they're filled with characters who didn't make the cut and are just there for the ride. I am playing the Wii version, so the courts do look a little inferior graphics wise, but they still look pretty decent. The game also doesn't have much original music. A lot of the songs are ripped straight from the games of each IP, which I'd still say the picks that they chose are still pretty good. I do like the few original songs they actually have in this game. They sound really nice. Overall, SEGA Superstars Tennis is a really average game at best. The actual tennis part of the game is unpolished and too stiff. There are many other tennis games that play better than this one. The only thing really worth playing in this game are the mini games. Those are legitimately fun and the thing worth playing. I also love the references and cameos that they were able to represent with this game with this limited tennis space. So I think as a SEGA game, it is a nice little homage. Just an okay game though. If you really want to play a fun tennis game with crazy gimmicks, then Mario Power Tennis is the way to go. Now, the next game here is Sonic and SEGA All Stars Racing. This game came out in 2010, 2 years after everyone's favorite racing game, Mario Kart Wii. Now, Mario Kart Wii is a generational banger of a game. Sonic and SEGA All Stars Racing practically has to compete with that. Now, one thing that you're probably wondering is, why are they deciding to do a kart racer when they have Sonic Riders, which is their original take on the racing genre that carries more of a Sonic-like identity? Well, we don't have an exact answer, but back then, people didn't really like Sonic Riders 1 or Zero Gravity. 1, because they're cowards, and 2, they sucked at the game. But, you know what? I'm all for a kart racing game with all the SEGA IPs. This is another game I have a lot of fond memories of playing as a kid, and while I think the sequel is overall better to play in my opinion, I think this game still kind of has its own merits that I enjoy better than Transformed. So to take a look at the roster, this is a massive improvement from SEGA Superstars Tennis. We got a lot of returning characters, there are some cut characters, and then we obviously got some new ones. Knuckles got added with the rest of the Sonic cast, which he deserves to be. And, Big the Cat? Why? I mean, it's funny, but it's a random choice, definitely. He also got new voice lines. I know as a kid I hated this back then, but now I just kind of like it. Big as a goat.
Attack! Watch this! Better look out! Get ready! Whoa! Hoi!
Billy Hatcher is now part of the roster. I'm surprised he wasn't in tennis before, but I'm happy he's here. BD Joe is the perfect character to be in a racing game. Great choice. They put Rio from Shenmue. Glad to see more Dreamcast representation, and I know he was heavily requested to be there. Jackie and Akira from Virtua Fighter is actually really cool. Virtua Fighter is a big fighting game franchise from SEGA, so they deserve some representation here. The Choo Choos are really funny to be in this game. They're adorable. I love them. The Bonanza Bros and Opa Opa are our retro reps for this game, and while I know next to nothing about them, I think they're pretty neat. Then there's Zobio and Zobiko? Who? House of the Dead? Wait, which one? A Japanese-only arcade where these two are zombies wanting to escape their captivity? Okay then, sure, I would have thought they brought in one of the humans, but these two are more quirky and silly, so I'm down with it. I actually think this is the best roster they've done for the All-Star Trilogy of games. We did suffer some losses though. Nice is now reserved as the flag person, which is pretty sad. We took out the second reps for some IPs, but they did get replaced by characters from other IPs to bring more variety to the roster, and I love the additions they added. Overall, really good character choices here. I'm still not really a fan of the character models though. The models are still kinda stiff looking, the characters don't emote during their celebration animations, and they still reuse voice lines. The characters are actually more expressive during races when they're doing tricks, boosting, or when they get hit. While the character models could still use work, the tracks themselves actually are really nice looking. I'm playing on the Steam version, so this is the best the game can look. The tracks are really good looking, but I just wish the models kinda got the same treatment. Now, let's get to the gameplay. The overall driving in this game actually feels pretty good. Every character also have their own stats to show what they succeed and fail in, so you'll definitely feel the differences in handling, speed, drift, and acceleration depending on your character. The only thing I'm not huge on is how the cars feel very weightless. Cars are really floaty in this game and feel like you're not going particularly fast unless you hit a speed boost. One of my biggest issues is the fluctuating difficulty in this game. In some ways, you would be just washing the AI because they just can't catch up to you with their lack of speed. This even goes for the highest difficulty in the game. However, there's also the inverse where it can be hard for you to catch up to your opponent because you're not going fast enough and you have to heavily rely on items to catch up. So sometimes it's just up to chance. Speaking of items, this game actually has a decent amount of them. The Mega Horn destroys racers around you and is actually like a precursor to Mario Kart 8's Mega Horn. The speed shoes are your boosts, missiles are your red shells, the boxing gloves are your green shells, the cones are your bananas. There's a rainbow that's as useless as the blooper, if not kind of worse, because you can still really see what's going on. There's a shield to protect yourself, and there's also bombs to throw. The variety is pretty close to what Mario Kart has with all of the same utility. Some of them are redundant, but they do their jobs well. All-Star moves are back in this game, and they are handled much better. They're essentially like the special items in Mario Kart Double Dash, but are way more cinematic. They all come in many different varieties. Supersonic boost through you, ooh-la-la shooting at you, beat covering your screen in graffiti, the Bonanza brothers going in front of the race and tossing bombs at you, Opa Opa being so good that they get not one, not two, but 3 all-star moves. To get these, you have to be pretty terrible at driving, but when you get to see these all-star moves, the cinematics of these are great references for their source material. There are 24 tracks in this game, but not everyone was able to get their own tracks to represent them. Sonic gets 3 variants like Seaside Hill, Casino Park, and Final Fortress from Sonic Heroes. Also, I'm just really glad to see that Sonic Heroes is getting the respect it deserves in this game. Billy Hatcher, Samba de Amigo, House of the Dead, Super Monkey Ball, and Jet Set Radio Future also get their own stages. While it kinda stinks that there are no other tracks for games like Space Channel 5 and Outrun, Sonic really didn't need 3 variants of tracks. I still think what they were able to give us overall was pretty decent. You can tell that they reused quite a few assets and tried to spin them to be as different as possible. For some, they weren't really successful, like the Seaside Hill and Final Fortress levels. However, with Billy Hatcher, Super Monkey Ball, Samba de Amigo, and Jet Set Radio Future, they were definitely able to stand out more with their environments. Super Monkey Ball, we go from a jungle to a desert to a pirate stage. Billy Hatcher, we go from the cold snow to a volcanic area. Samba de Amigo, going through the city to the rooftops to a big roller coaster. And Jet Set Radio Future was able to represent the different regions of Tokyo. The House of the Dead tracks are kinda all in Kurian's mansion, but they all are in different areas of the mansion like in the game. It's pretty cool. The track selection isn't perfect, but I overall enjoy racing in them. If you also have time to stop and look at the tracks slowly, there's so many references and nods to these IPs, which I honestly really love. I feel like such a nerd when I see them, and I keep learning new things I never saw before. I've made a video extensively talking about the references in the Jet Set Radio Future tracks, which you can definitely check out after watching this video. If you want to get more out of this game, there is a mission mode where you take part in multiple missions with various different objectives, from races, knockouts, which is basically the battle mode of this game, hitting targets, collecting rings, going through time gates. You don't get much reward out of it besides the in-game currency, but it does bring in some difficulty to the game if you're looking for a harder experience. One of the most underrated things about Sonic and SEGA All Stars Racing is the collection mode. This mode just gives you lore and little tidbits about all the characters, and this is one of the coolest things I've ever seen. Like, the fact that they went out of their way to do this for every character is really nice. They didn't have to, but I took my time to read this as a kid, and I got to know just a little bit more about these characters that I really didn't know before. I'm just happy that they decided to do this. They even do it with the racetracks. Like, again, they didn't have to do this, but they just wanted to add a little more charm to this game. I still really like Sonic and SEGA All Stars Racing. It is a pretty decent alternative to Mario Kart if you want to diverge from the usual. If you're a big SEGA fan, I think this game is worth it for the novelty of how it represents each IP with its very good roster. The driving is very smooth, although I still wish there was just more weight into the cars, and I think most of the tracks, while pretty good, there are some that kind of fall into the bland side of things. Still, it is a very fun game and I highly recommend it, and it's $10 on Steam right now, so that's a steal. Now, All-Star Racing is good, but the sequel is even better. I'd go as far as to say it's my favorite kart racer. I even played more than Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. I have so much admiration for Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transform, and I think it is a game that still holds up as a kart racing alternative. I'd say it's the best one. Right off the bat, I gotta talk about the roster of this game because it just leaves me confused beyond comprehension. Got a lot of good returning characters, sad cuts, and a very confusing mix of newcomers. Instead of Big the Cat, we now have Metal Sonic. This game was coming out around the same time Sonic 4 Episode 2, so it makes sense they want to promote that game with the return of Metal Sonic. The returning characters that were in SEGA Superstars Tennis are now back for this game, so Mimi, Knights, Rayala, Gum, Gilius, and Pudding make their returns. Now the newcomers, Vice from Skies of Arcadia, surprised it took him a while to actually be in a crossover game, but I'm glad he's here. Skies of Arcadia was another classic on the Dreamcast. Joe Musashi from Shinobi, the classic Genesis game. I'm down for this pick, and it's even better because he'll be getting a new game pretty soon. Aegis. This is this game's version of Rob in Mario Kart DS. It's a Dreamcast VMU that transforms into a Daytona car, an Afterburner jet, and a SEGA Dreamcast controller. It is such a cool novelty character. But then we get the weird choices. We have Football Manager from Football Manager, Shogun and Williamus from Total War, General Winter from Company of Heroes. What? On top of these random picks, we have guest characters, which this is the only time they get to do this. There's Wreck-It Ralph, which, alright, sure, Sonic is in Wreck-It Ralph, and it's Pixar's latest movie at the time. Ralph hopping from game to game, you know, it makes sense. Professional NASCAR racer Danica Patrick, she was all over the marketing for this game, but why Danica Patrick? Then to top it off, we have the Team Fortress 2 team consisting of Heavy, Spy, and Pyro. Team Fortress 2 was huge on PC, so I guess it's not crazy that their characters is also in this game. I don't know, this roster fills me with so many mixed feelings. I'm glad that we got the second reps back, but losing characters like Billy Hatcher and Jackie and Akira kinda stinks. I'm happy with the additions of Vice, Joe Musashi, and Aegis, but characters that were added for this PC port and the guest characters kind of stink. Like, they definitely could have added back the characters that they cut instead of these guys. The guest characters are also not very interesting to me. No offense to Team Fortress 2, Wreck-It Ralph, and Danica Patrick, but I didn't really boot up a SEGA crossover game to play Wreck-It Ralph. I want to play as my niche IPs who I haven't seen in a new game in years. Almost decades. Anyways, did they finally improve on the character models? Well, somewhat. But in some cases, I feel they kind of did worse than the first All-Stars Racing game. But it's a bit of a step in the right direction. You also lost a lot of cool animations for characters when they're doing their tricks off ramps. Now it's just flips. You only get like special animations when you reach first place. It's a shame that visually with the character models, it lost a bit of its charm. However, the racetracks? Oh my lord, I love the way these tracks look. I'd say they have more charm to them than the Mario Kart ones. On top of the many cool references and cameos they showed off in these levels, due to this game's main gimmick, the tracks have a lot more to work with. The variety is also superior to the previous game. Now we have at least one track from multiple different IPs to get representation. Of course, we got Sonic, Monkey Ball, Jet Set Radio, and Samba de Amigo getting their tracks, but other IPs were able to finally get their time to shine. Knights gets a stage, Golden Axe gets a stage, Panzer Dragoon, Afterburner, Burning Rangers, Shinobi. The variety here is great. It all culminates with the Races of Ages, where it's a big tribute to Sega's history. Some of them even have stories to tell in their tracks. For example, the Skies of Arcadia track. You start off having more ground to race on at the beginning, then that beginning section starts falling apart because there's an ongoing fight between the pirates in the second lap. Then on the final lap, it's all flying because the entire road has been destroyed and now rock formations are being destroyed around you. The House of the Dead track is another where you first go through the mansion and then the lab, and then the second lap we reach down to the sewers where the monster is unleashed. Then in the final track we get to see a wedding between Zobio and Zobiko and go down to the lower part of the mansion and into the gardens. Stuff like this is really cool, and I'm glad Sumo Digital went all out with these with the budget they had. So what is the catalyst for all these new dynamic levels? The brand new gimmick for All-Stars Racing Transform is your vehicle transforming mid-race. You're not only driving, but you're also flying planes and riding on boats. This is like a mixture of Mario Kart 7 gliding and riding in water mid-race and Diddy Kong's Racing having vastly different vehicle types. The cars seen some changes to the physics, the weight of the cars actually feel much more heavier, no more floatiness from the previous game, which I prefer. Drifting and overall steering feels tighter in this game, and tricks now being flips mean you can now flip over from side to side to avoid any potential obstacles or items coming your way. They also apply to how you land with your boost. While taking flight, you are able to do barrel rolls in any of the 4 directions, and the drift is kind of more like an outside drift. I like how the plane controls. The boat is definitely the hardest to control due to the nature of having to deal with the water physics making the boat move. It's like a heavier, slightly clunkier version of the car, but it's still manageable. If you're not a fan of how a character feels, then you can modify them. This is a new mechanic added to the game where you can choose multiple different modifications for every character depending on what stat you want them to have a focus on. Do you want your vehicle to have better handling, more speed, more acceleration? Well, now you can choose that. I think it brings a unique twist to how people want to control their characters. The item system has also gone through a rework. They changed and retooled a lot of items. You have the boost, the fireworks is now your green shell, the blowfish is kind of like your banana, the glove catches one item that gets thrown at you and makes it yours. This is actually a pretty neat item. The hot rod is a turbo boost, but you can detonate it at any time to hit other racers surrounding you. The RC cars are your red shells, the swarm creates a swarm of wasps in front of the racers to stop them, and then the tornado makes you turn backwards to reverse your controls. The items in this game share a lot of similarities to the first game, but their effectiveness has varied for better or for worse. Speaking of reworks, the All-Star moves have gone through the biggest change, and I personally say it was for the worst. In the last game, you saw there was a different variety of All-Star moves, from a really fast boost, shooting projectiles, getting people in a conga line to blow them up, throwing bombs in front of racers behind you, screen covering. The All-Star moves in the first game were very distinct and represented the characters very well. In Transformed, All-Star moves were stripped of their cinematic cutscenes and uniqueness to make them feel like glorified power stars in terms of utility. There's 3 categories you can place these All-Star moves in. One that shoots projectiles forward, one that's a shockwave attack, and one that's a boost. Gum being the rare exception to have an All-Star move that shoot projectiles behind her, but it is still very corny how these All-Star moves turned out. They're effective, but very boring visually. Real meat and potatoes of this game is the World Tour mode. This is your main campaign mode and it's basically the mission mode from the first game, but more streamlined. This is your main method of unlocking characters and racetracks. There's a variety of things to do besides the regular races. There's battle races, traffic challenges, boost challenges, drift challenges, ring races, and pursuit where you can shoot down a tank. There are 4 different difficulties ranging from the C class to the S class. The higher the difficulty, the more stars you earn, which is 4 stars. It's a really lengthy single player campaign and it's pretty challenging. Sometimes it's fun, other times it's hard for the wrong reasons. This more so comes down to the races where on the S class difficulty, the AI becomes very cheap. In the previous game, I spoke about how the AI was either too easy and couldn't catch up to you, or it was too hard and you couldn't catch up to them. In this game, the S-Class AI is always very hard to catch up to. It seems like their speed is always significantly faster than yours, and they have juiced up acceleration because when you hit them with an item, they rarely slow down because unless it's a blowfish or something, they just keep going at their usual speed. They are very vicious. It feels like they only target you. Their goal is never to win, but to make sure they screw you over any chance they get. It's frustrating sometimes because it feels like you can never catch up to them by driving well, and you have to solely depend on items. It is still possible to get first place just by being good, but sometimes it just feels like it's all up to luck. We also finally have an all-star game with a mostly original soundtrack, with each track getting a remix of a song from the IP they're representing. And I gotta say, this is one of the most underrated Sonic soundtracks out there. I rarely hear people talk about how great these remixes are in this game, and it's a darn shame. So much good stuff, and I recommend you give this a listen, please. Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transform is not only one of my favorite racing games of all time, but also one of my favorite Sonic games of all time. Actually, it's in my top 10. Is it crazy to rank a racing game so highly like that for Sonic? Probably, but I have so much emotional attachment to this game and I always go back to it when I just want to relax. I always have a smile on my face replaying it and I never get tired of it despite the small disputes I have about the visuals and some gameplay mechanics. The game is great. That's all there is to it. So we got an okay tennis game, a decent racing game, and then a sequel to said racing game which I really adore. I would say that the SEGA All-Star games were a really good representation of a lot of SEGA IPs. They may not be the most standout, but as someone who grew up with these IPs, I'm glad to have these games to show what makes them special for people. Now the question is, if they were to make another one, where would they go from here? Would they try sports again, maybe? They could make tennis better. Another racing game? I'd be down for it. Have a roster more similar to that of the first All-Star Racing game. They could also add Yakuza characters, maybe Kiryu or Ichiban. They could also add the Phantom Thieves and the Morgana Mobile. That would be pretty awesome. Maybe they could do a crossover RPG with just the second characters in the style of Project X Zone. Who knows? I think it'd be a good time for it considering old SEGA IPs are now making their resurgence. It would be cool seeing all those characters again in the RPG settings. Maybe I'm thinking too much into it. Either way, I would just love to see another SEGA crossover game. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you leave a like and comment what you thought about it. And if you're interested in seeing more of my content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and hit the bell icon so you can get a notification for my next upload. It really helps my channel grow. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.